can type them into the chat function. And at the end of the talk, there'll certainly be time to answer any questions that you have. Okay. Let's start by going over. Well, let's start. Let's see. Benny mentioned that you were sent an email with some handouts attached. So what I did today was I scanned the various documents that I often would hand out at the class. So I went ahead and scanned them and then split them up into two, what I called packets. You don't have to print them out, right? We don't need to waste paper, but you can look them over. There's two PDF files. There's a number of pages in each one, and print part or all of them, you know, depending on which things might be useful to you, but you might want to look them over first. And I split the two packets up. One was the vertical handouts and one were the horizontal ones. For some reason, I felt like they should be separate. I don't know why, maybe for printing purposes. But in those packets, see what interests you, print out what you want. You don't have to print them out if you don't want to. There's a couple of maps of the park. There's a list of plant communities in the park and the various plants within those communities that might be interesting to you. There's a sample key that you can play around with. There's a diagram of a typical flower with the various parts of the flower listed, which could be handy to review those terms. There's a list of botanical terms that I typed up myself in alphabetical order that I gathered over the years, really. When I'm using these botanical keys that botanists use to identify plants they don't know what they are, you need to be familiar with a lot of terms in order to use those keys properly. So I made that little cheat sheet mostly for myself, but I share it with you. Maybe it'll be handy for you as well. So those are some of the kinds of things that are in there. Also good places to find wildflowers on your own. There's a couple handouts with that. And I'll have a few hard copies of those with me this weekend as well, if you want to see what they look like if you didn't print them out. So again, in terms of the logistics of the class, tonight's a little lecture just to whet your appetite. And on Saturday, we'll all meet up at 8 in the morning at the Joshua Tree Visitor Center in the town of Joshua Tree. So just behind the visitor center is a little dirt parking lot, and that's where we usually gather a few minutes before 8. And from there, we will carpool. I mean, you don't have to carpool, but if you want to carpool, you'll have that option, because at the end of the day, we will return. We're going to do a loop, and around 4 o'clock or so, we'll be back in that parking lot to finish our day. And we'll have radios so we can talk car to car. You should bring drinks and snacks and a lunch. There's really nowhere to eat in the park, or buy food, I should say. So bring a lunch with you, because we'll have lunch somewhere. I don't know if it's going to be Hidden Valley or Barker Dam, but somewhere, one of those two places. And we're going to drive and park and hike and look for wildflowers. Now, we'll also look at birds and mammals and reptiles and whatever else comes our way. So it'll, you know, it always turns into a natural history adventure. But this is the Flora of the Mojave and Colorado Desert Region class. So we're going to try to stay focused on finding flowering plants, both annuals and perennials. But it's really just an excuse to enjoy the park and get to know Joshua Tree National Park and see what we can see. Joshua Tree National Park is a very large national park. It's so big that it includes two different deserts. And you're going to get to sample both those deserts this weekend. On Saturday, we'll be in the Mojave Desert, the high desert. And on Sunday, we will see the Colorado Desert section of the park, the low desert. And they're both different. They're both beautiful in their own way. The wildflowers tend to bloom first in the low desert and then kind of make their way up to the high desert. So I'm also excited about Sunday and what we might find down in the low desert. I think there should be some things blooming. So then on Sunday, and you were emailed all this information, I'm just reviewing it. But on Sunday, we'll meet in the low desert part of the park at a place called Cottonwood Visitor Center at 8:30 in the morning. It takes maybe 45 minutes to drive over to Cottonwood from, say, 29 Palms. So we built in a little time there. So hopefully you can try to get there by 8:30. And then we'll start exploring that region of the park and making 3 or 4 stops and finishing around lunchtime. 12:30, 1 o'clock, we should be finished. So you don't have to bring a lunch on Sunday per se, but definitely, have water and plenty of snacks to keep you going through the morning. And if you want to bring a lunch, please do, because we could go as long as 1 o'clock. But we will end up right near Interstate 10. So if you're heading home on Sunday, and most of you probably are, you can jump right on I-10 and head to where you need to go from there. I would say at this point, are there any questions? But if you have any, you can unmute yourself really quickly about logistics. But otherwise, I'll assume what I said is clear. And I don't see any hands going up, but so we can jump right into the presentation. I was going to go through some of the wildflowers that we might encounter this weekend, tell you a little bit about them. And again, if you have questions, you can also type them into the chat. My email is there. It's also on the handouts that Benny's been sending you. So please email me anytime you have questions. Even after the class is over, you can send me pictures of plants and wildflowers that you encounter, and I can help you identify them. Happy to do that. We will have some magnifiers available for you to use this weekend. They're called loupes, L-O-U-P-E. I think Benny's bringing some, right? And I may have some as well, even for sale if you want to purchase some of your own. They're only $10. But these are some of the things that wildflower enthusiasts and botanists carry with them at all times: a field notebook, something to write with, a magnifier to look at things closely, maybe a little plant press. Now, of course, in the national park, we can't collect anything, so we're not going to be pressing plants on Saturday or Sunday. We'll just take pictures of them. And there is a great website that a lot of you probably already know about. It's called iNaturalist. The letter I, and then the word naturalist.org. And I'll tell you more about it this weekend, but iNaturalist is great. You can take photos of anything that you encounter out there in nature, not just plants, but animals or animal tracks or animal scat, anything. And you can post it to iNaturalist. It's free. You can start a free account there. And then there's hordes of people out there who will help you identify these things. And usually you have an ID within about 30 seconds, because there's people out there just waiting to help you identify what you need. Now there's a bunch of books and field guides that could be helpful. One of my favorites is pictured here, California Desert Flowers by the Moorharts. And here it is again, along with some other books that I'll have with me this weekend. I've got my little wildflower portable library that I'll bring with on Saturday with all of these books and others as well. There is no one field guide that does it all when it comes to botany in our area. So you really do need a variety of books in order to find what it is you're looking for. And in terms of buying books, the National Park Visitor Center, they sell a few, but most of the books I just showed you and the other ones I'm going to bring, they don't sell. But in case you're ever down in Palm Desert, just letting you know about a fantastic bookstore that's hidden. It's on Highway 111, and it's called Desert Map and Aerial Photo. And you wouldn't know it from the from the title of the business, but it's actually an amazing bookstore with natural history books, and they kind of specialize in having books that nobody else carries as well. You do need to phone them ahead of time, though, because they have weird hours, and sometimes they're hiding in there. But all you have to do is phone first, and then they'll open the door for you. And definitely tell them that I sent you and you're one of my students, and they'll give you a nice discount. But that's down in Palm Desert. And if you're ever in Borrego Springs, there's another fantastic bookstore there with all these books and more, and that's the Borrego Desert Nature Center in Borrego Springs. One of the handouts I sent you in that packet is a simple key that you can look at. And here's another simple key. They're called dichotomous keys. Maybe you've used them before. They're used in science and natural history in every subject, but especially in botany and especially in entomology, which is one of my other specialties, insects. We really rely on these keys because there's so many plants out there that are really hard to identify or to find in a book right off the bat. There's just too many of them. And it's the same thing with insects. There's so many different kinds of insects out there that one book doesn't do it all. So you kind of need these keys to help guide you. And keys are always arranged in couplets. So if you look at number 1, for example, you'll see there's an A and a B question. And then there's couplet number 2, 2A and 2B, and then 3A and 3B. So there's always couplets. And you always start at the beginning, 1A, and you read whatever's there, and it's kind of like a question. It's kind of like Jeopardy. Whatever you read there, you kind of put into the form of the question. So 1A is asking you if the plant in front of you that you're trying to identify has needle leaves. So imagine there's a question mark there. And if the answer is yes to any one of these questions, you do whatever it says to the right. In this case, it says go to 2 if the answer is yes. If the answer is no to the first question in a couplet, you go down to the next question in the couplet. So yes, you go to the right, no, you go down. So in this case, let's imagine we're trying to identify the leaf that's listed as A to the right. It's circled. You see that leaf, it's in your hand. You don't know what it is. So you ask yourself, does it have a needle? Is it a needle leaf? The answer is no. That means you go down to 1B. And then the question is non-needle leaf. And the answer is yes now. And then you go to the right, and it says what? It says go to 3. So you jump down to 3, you start at 3A, and you ask yourself, is it a simple leaf with a single leaf? And the answer is yes, it is. And so you go to the right, because the answer is yes, and it says go to 4. So you jump down to 4, and then 4A asks you, does it have a smooth edge? And the answer is yes. So you go to the right, and this time it says go to 5. So 5A says the leaf edge is smooth, You look at your leaf and you say, yes, indeed, my leaf edge is smooth. You go to the right and you have your answer. In this case, it's a magnolia leaf. So you're done. So when you finally get to a place where there's an answer, you've made it. Otherwise, you just keep jumping either to the right or jump down and work your way down the key, always starting with number 1. If you answer any of the questions incorrectly along the way, and it happens all the time, especially when they ask you these really nitpicky details, that's when you got to pull out my handy chart to help decipher some of these words. But if you get even one little mistake along the way, you're going to be taken down a wrong path and never find your way. So a lot of times you have to kind of go back to the beginning and find where you made the mistake. So that's just kind of a quick look at how to use a key. But the neat thing about these keys is once you are comfortable using them, then you can use a key for anything, to identify anything, as long as you can understand what it is they're asking you. That's the tricky part sometimes. This one's pretty simple, but when you get out your month's guide, you're going to see keys that are much more complex than this. Again, another handout I sent you looks kind of like this, just to remind you the various male and female parts of the flower. There's not going to be a test on Sunday, so you don't have to worry. But some of these terms may be used in the keys or even in our discussions as we're looking at flowers in the field. The male part of the flower is the stamen, which includes the anther and the filament. The female part of the flower, the pistil, has 3 parts: the stigma, which is the sticky part up here, which collects the pollen, the style, this long stalk here, and then the ovary, where the seeds are formed. There's sepals and there's petals. Those are the main parts of the flower. And let's get on to the actual flowers. So now I'm going to go through some of the flowers we might see on Saturday or Sunday. Again, there's no test, no quiz. Is anybody taking this class for credit, Benny?
Yeah, we actually have 3 students taking the class for credits. Yeah.
So I take that back. There is going to be a test for you 3 students. So you guys need to pay close attention, whoever you are. I'll find out on Saturday. But yeah, if you're taking it for credit, don't panic. I expect you to take notes. So you should have a field notebook, you 3 taking for credit. So I do expect you to take field notes on Saturday and Sunday, and I hope that you will, and I hope everybody will, really. And then there will be a small assignment at the end that you'll have a week to complete, and there'll be some little quiz of some kind that you'll be able to complete on your own during the week. But I'll tell you more about that on Saturday. Anyway, let's get back to the flowers. This is the desert star. This is what we call a belly flower. It grows very low to the ground. This photograph makes it look like it's a very big, profuse flower, but it's not. It's a tiny belly flower. And in order to see the desert star, you got to get on your belly. I think that's what this guy's doing. He's actually looking at a Bigelow monkey flower. I can see some pink on it. But we call these flowers that are really low to the ground and really diminutive and small belly flowers, because you really do need to get on your belly with your hand lens to appreciate them. And again, we certainly can't pick these flowers, but you can get up close to them and take some really nice photographs, including the woolly daisy, which is in the genus Seriophyllum. Again, this is a very healthy looking, robust woolly daisy. A good rainy year is when you take a photograph like this. This past year hasn't been very rainy. There's been some rain, so there's been enough to produce some blooms, but in non-rainy years like this year, don't expect the flowers to be as kind of robust as this one is. But this guy's really tiny and yellow, and we'll be looking for it in some of those gravelly wash areas. in that same area. These gravelly washes are great for so many wildflowers, but we'll be looking for the purple mat, which is in a family called Hydrophalaceae. Again, I'm not going to expect you to memorize all those families right off the bat. But on Saturday and Sunday, we'll talk about what families these flowers belong to, and maybe you'll start to see some connections between them. Like in this family, there's a lot of the purple flowers that we see. Kryptantha is a genus, and there are many species within that genus, Kryptantha. And they're very difficult to key out, to identify the species. If you want a real challenge, print out a key to identifying the Kryptantha and go for it. It's not easy. So most of us are happy just to call them Kryptantha spa. And that means it's one of the Kryptantha species, but we don't know exactly which one. You have to key that out to be 100% sure. But all the Kryptanthas tend to be very tiny. Again, you need a hand lens or a loupe to really appreciate this tiny little white flower. And they've also got almost like little hairy parts to them. Almost looks like a little scorpion tail. They're also called forget-me-nots sometimes, Kryptantha. Some people like to call these popcorn flowers, but this particular one is not a popcorn flower. So I think you're better off just calling them Kryptantha spa. In that same family though, see this one also has that fuzzy look to it like the other one did, but this one's yellow. So it's in the same genus or it's in the same family, I should say, but it's a different genus. And this is the checker fiddleneck. It grows a little bit bigger, and in a wet year, it can be really common, especially in the low desert. It also has that kind of scorpion tail look to it. This one's so pale, you hardly even see it against the background there, but there it is. It's the sand blazing star. It's a beautiful flower. And a lot of people mistake this for the ghost flower because it kind of looks like a ghost. But in a moment, I'll show you what a ghost flower looks like. This is actually in a different family from the ghost flower, but they do grow in the same areas. So it can be confusing. This one has different leaves though, compared to the ghost flower. So that's one way to tell. Sometimes the flower itself is what you want to look at, but other times you really want to look at the leaf to be sure what you're looking at. This is in a family called Loasaceae. And here is the same plant, but further back, kind of showing you how the whole plant looks like. It almost looks like a garden weed, doesn't it? When you look at these basal flowers here, I mean leaves. And then the flowers are coming out at the top here. It looks almost like something you'd pull out of your garden because you thought it was a weed. But that's the sand blazing star. Now here's the ghost flower for comparison. You see it also has those creamy, translucent-like petals, but also notice in the center of it, you see kind of a cinnamon colored area there that you don't see in the sand blazing star. And the leaves are a little different too. They're not quite as serrated as the previous one. Let's go back. See these leaves here, how they're kind of really cut into. This one, not so much. This is the ghost flower. And when you look at it really close like this, now you see these beautiful little red spots that you won't see on a sand blazing star, or at least they won't be as bright. So it does have a different look, but it takes a few specimens before you kind of get it. Now, when you look at the, remember, insects are seeing things in ultraviolet. So when a bee flies by here, these little spots really light up to them. They're almost beckoning those bees to come in like little landing lights on a runway. And that's why they're there. And so these lights guide the bees into the center of the flower, which is where the nectar reward's going to be. And it turns out that this shape here kind of looks like a female bee, one of our native bees. So bees are fooled by this ghost flower. They're lured into the flower. They even think they might be finding a female bee there, but it's not. And they end up getting pollen on their bodies, and the flower tricks them into coming in for a landing and dispersing its pollen onto their body. There's not much of a nectar reward there, actually. It's a trick. It's a trap. So that's the fun thing we'll talk more about on the weekend when we see different plants. We can talk about these interesting relationships they have with animals, with insects or birds, etc. Here's a desert chicory that happens to have a beetle hitchhiker. This is a neat flower in the aster family. What you might call petals aren't really petals. They're actually ligules, because you may remember in the aster family, it used to be called the composite family. And there's male and female parts to the flower. In fact, there's many of them. So what looks like one flower is actually a multitude of different flowers with both male and female parts. And so what I'm encircling right here, this ligule and the inner part here would be one flower. And then there'd be another flower here and another flower there. And when you put them all together, you've got yourself one of these composite flower heads. So that means these technically aren't petals then, because they're each part of an individual flower. We'll talk more about that kind of thing on Saturday as well. But this is just a neat looking flower, and it's got a very unique edge to it. So when you see these white flowers with a little bit of spacing in between the ligules and this little edge here, that's going to be the desert chicory. Here's another look at it. See the spacing in between the ligules, and then the edges are what help identify it. And the stems of the desert chicory you'll see on Saturday, they're very thin and dainty and cannot support the flower head. And they would just kind of blow over in the wind. And so you often see desert chicory growing up amongst another shrub to give it support, just like you see here. Because it can't really grow out in the open on its own. It's just too flimsy. The favorite flowering shrub of hummingbirds is called the Tuperosa, and Tuperosa actually means hummingbird. It's one of the many words that translates into hummingbird. And it's a tropical plant, and it usually blooms red, although I'll show you a yellow one in a moment. But if you want to plant something to attract hummingbirds in your yard, and you should be planting native plants if you live in the desert, this is probably your number one pick right here, the Tuperosa. And we will see this in bloom this weekend. And maybe we'll even see a Costas hummingbird coming in for a drink. And here's a yellow version of the Tuperosa. So sometimes there's variance in these plants. Even the Ocotillo, which normally blooms red, also has a yellow variant, just like the Tuperosa. Not quite as attractive to hummingbirds, but they can still get nectar from it. The rock daisy, true to its name, does like to grow in and amongst rocks. So it's pretty low growing. It kind of sprawls like semi-shady areas where there's rocks mixed in. So it's a well-named wildflower, the rock daisy. Here's a closer look at it. I saw some this weekend, so it's starting to bloom. This past Sunday, I was in Anza Borrego, which is also famous for its wildflower blooms. Now, they're not having a super bloom year there either, but if you hike the Palm Canyon Trail, which is the most popular trail there in Anza Borrego, there's a pretty good wildflower display going on, especially on the lower part of the alternate trail. And we saw a lot of these ones I'm showing you tonight, including the rock daisy and the apricot mallow. So the apricot mallow is a perennial shrub. So the plant is green and visible throughout the year, unlike some of these wildflowers that are annuals that really only pop up for a very short time and disappear completely. But this is actually a shrub, and this is the time of year when they start to bloom. So on Sunday, I was noticing some buds on the mallows that are just getting ready to burst. So maybe we'll run into some that have opened up. Here's a closer look at it. It's also got a nickname, the sore-eyed poppy. So you got to be careful with this mallow family. If you touch the leaves and then maybe touch your eyes, you could cause some irritation. Sore-eyed poppy. So be careful about that. One of the things that tells you that a plant is a mallow is actually the leaf. You don't even need to see the flower. Look at these leaves, how distinctive they are. They're kind of, I don't know if this is an official word or not, but I like to use the word they're crunkled. So it looks like they kind of crunkled up, and that's a mallow leaf right there. And they are kind of fuzzy looking too. And it's that fuzz that if you touch the leaf that could get into your eyes and cause irritation, so be careful. And here's a variety of the apricot mallow. So one of the reasons the scientific name of the apricot mallow is ambigua, it refers to this variation in the flower color. It's not always apricot. Sometimes it's more of a rose color or pink. Same species, different variation. Now here's another member of that same family with that almost same kind of crunkled leaf and fuzziness. But this is a different species, and it's called the rock hibiscus. It's not common. If we're lucky, we might find one in the low desert on Sunday. But it's a beautiful flower. So, and eventually you'll see all these if you keep doing this kind of thing and keep getting out there every spring, because every spring is different. And eventually you'll run into a spring when we have lots of rain and everything will be blooming. Desert rock pea is a fairly common kind of a perennial shrub flower. I expect we'll find some, probably even on Saturday, kind of growing in and amongst other plants like it is here, growing in and amongst an agave. And here's a close-up look at the flower. So plants in the pea family, Fabaceae, have this kind of arrangement of the petals, where some of the petals are kind of more upright, and then some are kind of down below. So it has kind of a lip look to it. And in many members of this family, once they're pollinated by a native bee, for example, there's a pH change in the color and in the petal, and the color actually changes. So you can see here's an old flower that's been already pollinated, and it's reddish. It's lost its yellow color. So once it's pollinated, the door kind of closes, there's a pH change, and it changes color. And this is one way that they can tell the pollinators that it's too late. Don't waste your time on this one, go to the next one because this one's been taken. Here's another member of the pea family, a very stringy plant called Huffman Sigia. And at first it just looks like this wiry plant and almost looks dead. But when you look close, if it's blooming, it has these pretty little yellow flowers that have that pea family shape to them. Huffman Sigia. It's not common, but maybe we'll run into some, especially on Sunday, in the pea family. Now, if you're driving down to Interstate 10 on Highway 62 near the wind farm, you'll notice a pretty broad sea of yellow, light yellow flowers. These are desert dandelions. So I know we're going to see these somewhere, Saturday and or Sunday. So even in a not so wet year, there's always desert dandelions around. Some of them have the red spots and some of them don't. We'll talk about that on Saturday when we see one. See if you can figure out why that is. In the meantime, it's your homework. Why do some have red spots and why don't others? These two don't. Desert dandelion, these are native flowers, all of these are. And it's another composite flower head. So this is not just one flower you're looking at. This is a multitude of flowers. Everywhere you see what looks like a little petal, that's another flower. And there's 2 layers of them too. So there's just a whole bunch of different flowers in one flower head with both male and female parts, all in one. Here's another aster family. It's a huge family, this aster family, which used to be the composite family. And this one's called sweet bush. It's a perennial shrub that grows amongst the rocks. And when it's in bloom, it's got this kind of fuzzy little flower that first is yellow, and then kind of like those other pea family members I showed you, once each individual little flower is pollinated, it turns red to indicate to the bees that it's too late. And it turns out that chakwalas love to eat these flowers. And one of the nicknames of this plant is Chakwala's Delight. And you can see why. Look at this guy. He came down from the rocks, and the chakwalas will actually climb in amongst the flowers to munch on them. Wouldn't that be fun to see this weekend? Maybe Sunday. The lizards are just starting to come out. And by the way, the weather, it looks like the forecast is going to be pretty nice this weekend. It's not going to be too hot, but it's not going to be too cold, but it's going to be warm enough that I think it'll be very pleasant. Most of the places will be, and maybe we will even see a few lizards start to wake up. One of the common tree-like shrubs that grow in the washes is the desert willow. It's in a tropical family. It's one of these ice age kind of relics that's still hanging on here in the desert. Grows only in the washes, and when it blooms, it's absolutely beautiful. Almost looks like an orchid flower. Desert willow. On the ground, in the gravelly washes, we'll be looking for members of this family, the evening primrose family, and one of them is called yellow cups. They tend to have leaves, these basal leaves that are very flat and kind of pushed right onto the top of the gravel. And then up from this basal mat of leaves rises this little stalk with all of these different flowers. It's called yellow cups. Here's what it looks like when it opens up and blooms in a good wet year. So keep in mind, this was a really wet year when I took this photo. This year, maybe you just see 1 or 2 flowers at a time blooming, not this big profusion like you would see in a wet year. So when the conditions are wet, the plants take advantage and grow to their largest size. And when they've only got a little bit of water to work with, they can only afford to grow to a very small size and produce only a couple of flowers. That's one way that plants and these wildflowers really are different than, say, insects or reptiles or any animal that you can think of. Animals don't grow bigger, and insects don't grow to bigger sizes just because there's more water available. They're always the same size as an adult. There just might be more of them if it's wet. But in flowers, they can grow to much larger sizes. Each individual can when it's wet. Something to think about. This one may not be very showy, but it's kind of unique, and we'll see it out there. It's a perennial kind of a shrub, but it's also kind of an annual too. So it's kind of in both categories, but it's called the Desert Trumpet because of those little swollen stems that look like little mini trumpets. There's some different ideas out there as to why the stems are swollen. One of the ideas is that they might be able to store carbon dioxide in those swollen stems, which would help them grow.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
You say this could be perennial or annual. What do you mean by that?
Well, I guess what I mean is you'll see the stems of Desert Trumpet all year long. They're pretty big and they don't necessarily go away, but in a wet year, you'll see lots of Desert Trumpets suddenly emerging where there were none. So does that answer your question? And so I don't know whether to classify this as an annual or a perennial. It's kind of a little bit of each because it's so big and it's so visible that it doesn't just blow away like a desert dandelion does after a few weeks of blooming. It's still there. You can still see the trumpets, but it's not really alive and blooming at that point. It's just there. It doesn't go away.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. This little guy is pretty common. It's called the pin cushion. I saw a bunch of these on Sunday. Fremont was one of these explorers and botanists in the 1800s. So there's a number of things with Fremont attached to them. And if I'm not mistaken, there's more than one Fremont too. So you got to be careful. You're not assuming they're all the same Fremont, but there's the Fremont cottonwood you may have heard of as well. This is the Fremont Pin Cushion. And this one, as far as I know, was named after this guy, John Fremont, who was the first senator from California. How about that? I wonder if he really found that flower or somebody else found it and named it after him. I'll have to check into that. He lost I think he ran for president, but lost. The lupines are in the pea family, and they're usually some shade of purple. There's a couple of white varieties, but the purple color is often a good start when you're thinking lupin. And then you look at the flower shape up close with your hand lens, and that's another clue that you're on the right track with lupin. It's going to have that pea family shape to it. And then with the lupins themselves, you look at the leaves. They've got this kind of umbrella-like, kind of a more circular leaf pattern. And again, this was a really wet year when the lupins were really profuse and big. And this one's called the Arizona lupin. We'll probably see a few of these lupins on the side of the road, but they probably won't be this big and healthy looking. That's a closer look at some of the individual flowers. So you can see some of them still have yellow and white centers, right, near the top. And then others, the flowers, the insides have already turned red. So again, that's a pH change. And that's an indicator to the little tiny native bees that pollinated that, hey, this one's done. Go up here. This wildflower, it's another one of those sort of perennial shrubs, but can be a lot bigger and more conspicuous in a wet year kind of thing. But it's often overlooked because it just looks like kind of a weedy, tumbleweed kind of thing. But if you look close at the wire lettuce, you'll see there's tiny little flowers. They're really nice looking. They're kind of a light pink. Or it looks white, but when you look close, it's this really faded kind of pink. And sometimes in some books, they actually call this plant the desert pink because of that. But neat little flowers. It's in the aster family. So these aren't petals, actually. Those are many flowers in one, but you really need a hand lens to appreciate the wire lettuce. So we'll look for that. This is always a crowd pleaser when you're looking for wildflowers in the desert, the Canterbury Bells. And again, in a wet year, it'll be really big like this one. This year, not so big, but I did see some on Sunday, so they're already starting to pop out in certain places. Cross your fingers, we might be able to find some. If not on Saturday, then on Sunday. Maybe both, for lucky. Canterbury Bells. And when you look at them really close, it's just one of the most beautiful flowers. And in this one, you can actually see the stamens, the male part of the flowers. They protrude out of the the flower itself. So some flowers have these stamens, the male part of the flowers that stick out and are easily seen. And in other flowers, the stamens are completely hidden, deep inside the flower. And those are just a couple of the clues, to identifying these different flowers. Are the stamens visible? Are they not visible? What color are the tips of the stamens? In this case, they're kind of a creamy yellow color. In other plants like the Facilia, they might actually be purple on the ends. But anyway, that's the Canterbury Bells. It's in this family called the waterleaf family, Hydrophyllaceae. And it's got these big, almost lily pad-like leaves when you look at them. This is actually an evening primrose family member. It's called the woody bottle washer. It has this really tight knit kind of growth to it. Lots going on there. The leaves are really close together, and the flowers are kind of clustered too. So it's just everything's kind of clustered in the woody bottle washer. And that's one clue that it is a woody bottle washer. And then when the flowers open, it has more of that primrose look that you expect. These are some of the flowers starting to open up. They're kind of creamy white. They should have, I think, 4 petals. And again, this one has just a lot of leaf action all clustered together. Here's another look at it, all clustered. I don't have a picture of it. I should, but once all these leaves dry out and fall off, it leaves behind, if you can imagine, this skeleton that looks like the green leaves that you see here, but they're not going to be green anymore. It's just going to be little sticks like a skeleton. And that's why they call this a woody bottle washer, because it looks like the kind of brush you might stick down a test tube to kind of wash out your bottles. Maybe the miners did this to wash out their whiskey bottles or something. So we'll look for one on Sunday, but I think it's too early in the season to either find them or to find the bottle washers. You'll find those a little later in the season. And to find last year's means that they would be completely destroyed by now too. It's just too late. This is the Facilia group. This particular species is the notch leaf Facilia. And if you look at the leaves here, you can see why it's called that. It's got big notches in between these leaflets. Others, Facilias, don't have that look to it. So that's one clue, because a lot of Facilias are purple. This one has stamens that protrude out, you can see. So that's another clue. The purple is kind of a deeper purple. It's not so much a bluish purple, so that's another clue. And another clue that it's not leaf Facilia is this crisp white little throat here. So this is called the throat of the flower. And there's a pretty crisp line between the white and the purple. Here's a closer look. See that? A nice crisp line on the edge there. It's not kind of faded into one another. And then again, the stamens are sticking out, and look at the tips of them, they're purple. That's another clue. They're not yellow. So crisp white throat, purple tips to the male parts of the flower, notches on the leaf. It all adds up to notch leaf Facilia. Now the Facilia is another group of plants, this genus, that you don't want to touch. So try not to touch it, because they can cause some irritation to your skin, or if you rub your eyes or something, it wouldn't be good. So look, but don't touch a lot of these plants. Desert tobacco. Did you know we have a native tobacco? And yes, the Native Americans, I think, did smoke this. It's mostly leaves and very little flower. Look how tiny the flowers are, kind of hiding in amongst the leaves. Let's take a close look. It's also covered by aphids. They like the tobacco and the nicotine too. So this is desert tobacco, and it likes shady areas. I know a couple spots where we might find it against a nice shady, cool cliff in the low desert. So probably on Sunday. Tobacco family, tomato family, Solanaceae. Another member of that same family The leaf kind of reminds you of the previous ones. They're in the same family. This is called the thick-leaved ground cherry. It kind of looks like if you grow tomatoes, if you grow cherry tomatoes, this really kind of reminds you of a cherry tomato bush, and it is in the same family. But the flowers here are going to be yellowish green. So we'll take a slightly closer look here. So here's the flowers. It's called the thick-leaved ground cherry. So it grows kind of like a shrub, and it's very, very dense, like you see here with these kind of yellowish green flowers. And once the flowers go to seed, they form these cute little lanterns. So some books or people refer to this plant as Chinese lantern, because it has these little, I guess what looks like those Chinese lanterns that you light up and hang around your patio. And it likes to grow in and amongst the rocks, as you see here. So we'll be watching for that, especially on Sunday. Thick-leaved ground cherry. The family, again, is the tomato, potato, the nightshade family, Solanaceae. Back to the evening primrose family. This is one of the more common primroses in the low desert, especially. It's called the brown-eyed primrose. So if you don't immediately recognize it as a primrose when you see the leaf, you can zero in on the flowers, and you see they have that kind of four-petaled droopiness to them. And in this case, there is kind of a brownish, almost reddish in some cases, center to it. That's the brown eye of the brown-eyed primrose. So small little flowers in little clusters, they droop. And when primroses, evening primroses go to seed, they have these kind of little club-shaped seeds over here. That's another clue. It's a primrose. Now, why do I put the Swainson's hawk and this caterpillar here? The Swainson's hawk migration is well known and happening right now in Anza Borrego. These Swainson's hawks are migrating from Argentina all the way up to Alaska in some cases, and they're funneling through in huge numbers, or they will be in about a week, through the Anza Borrego Desert. And in wet years, when there's a lot of brown-eyed primrose, there's a lot of Sphinx moth caterpillars. This is the caterpillar of the white-lined Sphinx moth. If you live in the desert like I do, you may remember certain years, wet years, when there's a lot of caterpillars on the highways, and you can't help but squish them when you drive around. These are the caterpillars that you've seen. They turn into Sphinx moths. And the Swainson's hawks feed on the caterpillars, which feed on the brown-eyed primrose, which come out when we have rain. So the rain kind of triggers this whole cycle of events to happen. So that's why we're always so excited about those rainy seasons when we get them and those super blooms. But even in a year like this year, which is not a super bloom, you still have some brown-eyed primrose, you still have some caterpillars, just not a lot, and you still have some Swainson's hawks that are going to pass this way to eat those caterpillars. I saw a Swainson's hawk just 2 days ago, right here in the Coachella Valley. So we'll be watching for things like this. Another primrose, this one likes to grow out in the more sandy areas, is the Dune Primrose. So you're not going to see this up in the high part of Joshua Tree because it's just not sandy enough. But in the in the low part of the park, and especially when we get down into Box Canyon at the end of the day on Sunday, we'll be in the realm of the Dune Primrose, or we might find one of these. It has a very large, unmistakable flower, and it likes the sandy areas. And along with the Dune Primrose, they kind of go together, is the San Verbena. So there's a lot of verbena already out in the wind farm area where the desert dandelions are. Look for the purple, and that's going to be the San Verbena in its own family, the Verbena family. Little gold poppy grows on the sides of roads and in the washes. We'll be watching for that both days. It's got a kind of a parsley-like leaf to it. So even before you see the flowers come out, you know it's little gold poppy when you see this kind of field of parsley here. And then the tiny little flowers clinch it. Poppies have 4 petals, and they're not supported by sepals, and that's what gives poppies their unique look. They kind of blow in the wind, and you can see the yellow from all different angles because there's no sepals beneath them to hide the yellow or to support them. So they got a certain way these poppies do of kind of fluttering in the wind that people seem to like. And when they go to seed, you can see their seeds are these long little club things that stick out too. So this is the poppy family, Papaveracea. And at the same places where the little gold poppy is, you might find the desert gold poppy, which is a bigger version. The flowers are bigger. The plant's a little bit bigger. It's not quite as parsley-like, but somewhat. So hopefully we'll see both this weekend, and we can kind of compare and contrast and try to learn the difference. It's still a little tricky sometimes to tell them apart. But this one's more like our California poppy, the one that is orange. It's that kind of size. But notice the 4 petals, and they're not supported by any kind of sepals, and that's why they have this floppiness to them. This is a fun plant. It's in the mint family and Laminaceae, and mint families are known for having square stems. So if you were to take a cross section of this stem, it would be more square and not round. And of course, mint family members also have very minty fragrance in the leaves. And Chia has this neat kind of 2-tiered flower, and each tier has individual flowers on it. Each one of these little purple spots is a flower. And they take turns blooming. So this one will bloom, and then it'll die, and then that one will bloom, and then one over here will bloom, and then one over there. So they kind of rotate around, and that helps extend the blooming period. So instead of all blooming in a couple of days and it's over, there's always something in bloom for many weeks, because it takes turns sending out these little blooms, and that way they can keep the pollinating bees happy for longer periods of time. Little tricks. Here's a closer look at the Chia. The seeds of the Chia were collected by Native Americans and used as little energy boosts. They'd keep them in a special little pouch, and when they needed a quick boost of energy, they could pop a few of those Chia seeds in their mouth, and off they go. I've also heard, I'm not suggesting you try any of this, but I've also heard that Chia seeds can be put in your eyes, and you kind of let them float around in there, and it can help cure some of your eye problems. But I'm not suggesting you try that. Consult your doctor first. This one's fun to find in the gravelly washes, the Bigelow monkey flower, and here's Bigelow. So again, if you do a lot of this botanizing, you'll see the name Bigelow attached to a number of different flowers. But just like Fremont, there's 2 Bigelows. There's at least 2 of them. So don't assume the same Bigelow is the one whose name is on everything named Bigelow. You better check first. But according to my research, I believe the monkey flower is named after this guy, John Milton Bigelow, who was a physician who also liked to botanize, and he was on a boundary survey in 1850 near the border, and discovered this flower, and eventually it was named after him. So we hope to see it, especially on Sunday, maybe Saturday. And it's in this interesting family called Scrophulaceae, the figwort family. And here's a close-up look at the monkey flower. I think somebody saw a monkey face in here. Can you see one? I can't quite make it out, but I think that's how it originally got the name monkey flower. Maybe it's not this particular species, but maybe another member of the family has more of a monkey face. I can't quite find a monkey face in there, but maybe you can. Wild heliotrope is a viney flower that kind of crawls through the bushes and through the rocks and kind of goes everywhere, like a viney bush. And they're usually some shade of blue or purple. It can vary even amongst one species. It can vary. This one's a very light pastel blue, wild heliotrope. This picture here, a different photograph, is a different plant. It's a slightly darker shade of kind of a pastel pink or purple. And here's one that's very light, same species, wild heliotrope. Its scientific name is Facilia distans, which refers to its crawling, sprawling kind of nature. But we'll see this one. It's very common. It'll be kind of profuse underneath the creosotes and other shrubs, growing all over the place. Wild heliotrope. We'll also see bladderpod, if not Saturday, then on Sunday. It's another one of these tropical kind of ice age relics, you might say. It's a tropical family, the caper family, and it smells and tastes like pepper. And so we'll be smelling this plant when we find one, and you will agree that it's got a very peppery flavor to it. And the seeds are encased in these bladder pods, hence the name bladderpod. And it blooms yellow. So it's a really interesting shrub. Here's a close-up look at some of the pods. We'll see beaver tail cactus. Now the question is, will it be in bloom? Now on Sunday, I saw some buds that are very ripe and ready to pop in Anza-Bregos. So who knows, maybe we'll get lucky this weekend. It's got one of the most beautiful flowers in the desert. So if you don't see it this weekend, you will in a few weekends from now. So keep looking. But here's what it looks like. And if we can find one in bloom, we can play a few tricks on it. We can kind of tickle these little stamens here, and they will actually move towards the center. It's a behavior called thigmotropism. It's kind of neat to be able to communicate with a flower, but they will move in response to your touch because they think a small, tiny native bee has just entered the area, and all of the stamens then want to put their pollen onto that pollinator. So they all move towards the center. So you can kind of trick them. And once they do that, then eventually after some time, they will all kind of move back and reset. This cactus is another beautiful bloom, and this one is more up in the high desert. So maybe on Saturday, we'll find the Mojave Mound. Will it be in bloom? Cross your fingers. Might be a little too early, but who knows? I think we're going to end up on the 49 Palms Oasis Trail at the end of the day on Saturday, and there we may find some Mojave Mound. And growing in and amongst the rocks, if not Saturday, then on Sunday, we'll find this plant in the aster family called Trixus. It's more of a shrub. It's more of a perennial because the bush remains. And then in the spring or late winter, right about now, it starts to bloom with a yellow flower. Trixus, which is the genus, Trixis. We'll see mistletoe along the way, and we'll talk about desert mistletoe, which is a parasitic plant, and it's spread by this bird here, the phainopepla. So the phainopepla is one of the few animals that can actually consume mistletoe berries and not get sick. And beneath the favorite perch of the phainopepla, a pile of poop builds up like this. And in Greek, tetrascata means poop pyramid. So this is a tetrascata right here, all from a phainopepla bird. And out of this tetrascata, a new mistletoe plant will emerge. So that's how mistletoe is spread from plant to plant, through the digestive system of the phainopepla. A relative of the smoke tree, the indigo bush, also in the pea family, when it blooms, it's absolutely beautiful, just covered in these small purple flowers. So soon that will happen. Will it happen this weekend? I don't know. But when it does, very soon, it's something to see. And the smoke trees as well, which is in the same family. Has this purple bloom. That's Indigo Bush. Brittle bush is already in bloom everywhere. Even in the non-wet years, there's always brittle bush blooming somewhere, and so we'll see plenty of this one. Very common. Aster family. Again, what you're seeing here is not one flower, it's many flowers in one. Everywhere where you see what looks like a petal, that's another flower. The ocotillo are neat to see, especially when they're in bloom, and that's starting to happen right now, especially in the low desert. Sometimes they bloom without the leaves, and sometimes they leaf out and bloom at the same time. Kind of depends on the water situation and what they can afford to waste. Here you have an ocotillo blooming with no leaves. So it probably doesn't have abundant water, but it wants to get its flowers out. So it uses what little energy it has to put into the flowers. Creosotes are year-round shrubs, some of the oldest things on earth. And this time of the year, they start to bloom. They have little yellow flowers and these little fuzzy seeds. We'll talk about creosote when we see them on Saturday. Down in the low desert especially, we start to see the desert sunflower in the sandy areas. It's a pretty tall yellow flower, unlike the desert dandelion, which is lower to the ground and a lighter shade of yellow. These ones are going to be very tall and kind of more of an orangey yellow. And there's also the Dune sunflower. Now, the Dune sunflower is kind of similar to the desert sunflower, but it has a dark center. Compare it with this one. This one has orange center, but there's not a dark center to it at all. The Dune sunflower will have a dark center and really likes the sandy areas, even more so than the desert sunflower. So these ones you don't see as often. Filary is also called like stork's bill and heron's bill in some books, because some people think these little seeds of the filary, which is in the geranium family, look like a heron or a stork. Here's the flowers, pink with, I believe, 5 petals, geranium family. And here's storks and herons. What do you think? This is a great blue heron on the upper right. Here's a wood stork, lower right. Here's a sandhill crane. So is it a crane's bill? Is it a stork's bill? Or is it a heron's bill? Or is it all three? You get different books, you'll see it called different things, but it's all filary. These birds don't care. California primrose is one of the smallest primroses. You have to kind of squint to see it, but there it is. But there's the 4 petals, so that helps narrow it down at least. You know, mustard family is also yellow, usually with 4 petals. So you have to consider that too, but seeing 4 petals and seeing that it's yellow narrows things down quite a bit when you're identifying wildflowers. And this is actually a primrose. Jimson weed, Datura wrightii, named after this guy, Charles Wright. It looks like he's been eating some Jimson weed there too. His eyes are kind of bugged out there. This is a plant you don't want to mess with. You don't want to touch it. You definitely don't want to eat it. It causes hallucinations and even death. It's very toxic, very poisonous. So stay away from it. Just take photographs. Jimson weed. We probably will see this, and maybe it'll be in bloom. Big white flowers. It's in that nightshade family, along with the tomatoes and the potatoes and some of those toxic plants, desert tobacco, Jimson weed. Why is it called Jimson weed? We'll talk about that when we see it. How about we save that story? Mojave aster. So I think we might find some aster, although it's a little early, but in the Mojave Desert, where we'll be on Saturday, there is a light pink purple aster with a yellow center called the Mojave aster. And then when you're down in the Mecca Hills, where we'll be on Sunday, and then if you go down to Anza-Borrego, they also have their own versions of this. They're different species, but they look almost identical to it. Desert lilies are always a treat to find. We don't see them every year. They kind of just crawl up out of the sand. And first you see the leaves appear, and then comes the big lily-like flower. It's really something. So cross your fingers. Who knows? Maybe we'll get lucky and find one this weekend. And their leaves almost can look like a snake sometimes when they first form. And this is another one of the big prizes of the desert, the Mariposa Lily. I can't promise it this weekend, but we'll sure be excited if we find one. Some years, wet years, there can be a lot of these around, and other years, not a one. But I'll settle for one this weekend if we can find it. Really pretty flower. And maybe the prize of all prizes is the desert 5-spot. They're really hard to find. They're really local. They're really picky about where they grow and when they grow. So again, they're not visible every year. But when we find them, it's always a very special thing. And you can see why it's called the 5-spot, can't you? I mean, this is looking into the throat of the flower from above. And remember those insects who see an ultraviolet light, when they see those 5 red dots, to them, it just lights up like a Christmas tree, and it just draws them into that flower.
So Kurt, what's about the size of that one?
It's actually smaller than you think. And before I saw my first one, I saw photos like this, and I was looking for something big and conspicuous, thinking it would be obvious. And then when I saw my first one, I realized how small they really are. So they're smaller than you think. Let's see if, I guess there's no other picture of it, but that's the last slide. But they're pretty small little wildflower.
I saw some this morning in Sky Valley.
You found some?
The
This
5-spot, yeah.
How
Mhm.
many?
We probably saw 3 or 4 on a hillside.
And blooming? Yeah.
Yeah,
Blooming.
I saw the flower. I mean, I
Nice,
wouldn't have
nice.
recognized it anyway, otherwise.
Great. That's good to hear. So maybe
That's cool.
we'll find one. So that's it. Let's open it up to any questions you have. Remember to unmute yourself if you want to ask one, or maybe there's some questions in the chat. I don't know, Benny. You can look at that. If you don't have any questions, that's fine too, but here I am. Will we see all these flowers this weekend? No, but we're going to try, and we'll see other things that weren't on the list here too.
So
I'm sorry. One question I have is just about identifying the leaves and the shrubs when they aren't flowering. Is there a book that's particularly good for that?
No, I mean, again, there's no one book that's good for any of this. That's why I have a whole box full of books. But on Saturday, you can see my books, and I can certainly talk to you then and show you which books are good for which situations.
Okay.
But that's kind of comes next. After you learn what the flowers look like, you really got to pay attention to what the leaves look like, because most of the time you're going to see these things not blooming.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it can become challenging. So we'll talk about that too as we see the different plants about to bloom and try to guess what they are. I'll help you with that.
Thanks.
I had a question about those little snake-like leaves of the.
Yeah.
So what is it? It's the
desert lily has those snake-like leaves.
Yeah. So up higher elevation and much smaller than that is a similar thing that I can see coming out of the ground, little tiny snake-like leaves. And I don't think it's the lily because it's higher up. Do you know what that would be associated with?
But so it's not a lily, or you don't know?
I don't think it is. It's really small. I was thinking.
I guess I'd have to see a photo, and that's that would be a great candidate for iNaturalist too. You just snap a photo with your phone, pop it on iNaturalist, and within 2 minutes, you'll probably have some expert chiming in saying, oh, of course, that's a so-and-so.
Do the hyacinths have something like that or anything in the onion family?
Yeah, there is one of this onion family things that has maybe a snaky leaf. So,
Okay.
so if you have an inkling that it's a certain family, that's when you can get out like your California Desert Wildflowers book, which has a good organization of families of plants, and go to the onion family and start leafing through the few choices that you have.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. What else? Any questions about the weekend, or did I cover it all? Did I give you enough?
One question about where we're going. Are we going to be doing much rock climbing? I mean, I just have different shoes for walking and really getting into the rocks. And what should we wear?
No, we're not going to be doing much scrambling. We'll mostly be on trails that are
Okay.
fairly sturdy. I mean, there might be a rock here or there.
Yeah.
But you don't need anything special. We always want to be on the lookout for rattlesnakes, even though it's still a little cool for them. The reptiles are starting to wake up. I noticed this past weekend. So don't show up in flip-flops or sandals. I wouldn't recommend that.
And it's definitely the desert. So we would recommend, closed-toe shoes, something comfortable, something that you're okay with wearing for long periods of time. We're out in the field pretty much all day Saturday, and then from the morning till 1 o'clock on Sunday. So definitely wear comfy clothes, bring warm layers. It's the desert, temperature changes. It gets really cold at night. So maybe like a sweater and, a nice tank top or shirt that's comfortable during the day if it gets warm.
Oh yeah, I wanted to remind you before I forget, all of you, there's a talk on Friday night by Jim Cornette that you might want to attend if you're in town. It's at 7 o'clock. It's at the 29 Palms Historical Society, which I believe is the old schoolhouse. Is that right?
Yes, and there's only a certain amount of tickets that are going. From my understanding, it's about 49 tickets, and the class fills up pretty quickly. So if you guys are interested, it's going to be about the ocotillos and the hummingbirds. I would suggest you guys get there early. We can possibly make an exception, but also that's something that we have to work out with the old schoolhouse. There's not that much seating available, so try to get there early.
You can't reserve a ticket ahead of time.
No.
So I guess I'll be fighting all of you to get a ticket.
They're spacing the seating now.
Yeah.
I've actually seen this talk before, but I'm more than happy to see it again, and so I hope to get a ticket. And maybe I'll see some of you there at before 7 o'clock. But it's a neat talk on the relationship between the ocotillo and, in this case, the rufous hummingbird. So it's kind of a plant-animal relationship story, which fits right into this class.
If you guys are interested in attending that class, let me know. Shoot me an email or a text message, and I will reserve you guys' spots. So I'm just throwing it out there. I'll do it for sure. Yeah. So I make sure you guys have your guys' seats available, but you do have to let me know ahead of time. I'm going to be there on Friday night. So if you guys can let me know before Friday, so I can save you guys the tickets.
Yeah, good. Yeah. Save me one.
Okay.
Anything else?
Now's the time to ask. Any questions?
But we'll have all weekend too. So we'll have fun, traipsing around and seeing what we can find. So I look forward to seeing you all maybe Friday night for some of you, or Saturday morning at 8 o'clock at Joshua Tree Visitor Center.
And I'll also send out a reminder with the address and the time on Thursday. So any questions that you guys have, let me know beforehand. If not, you will get a phone call from me the day of the class looking for you.
And I think you've all got my email address. So if you think of something in the meantime, shoot me an email and I'll help you out. So thank you for everybody for coming, and have a great evening.
Bye, guys. Good night.